Welcome to Unleash the Awesome with Dave Gambrill. All of us have unique skills, talents, and abilities that aren't being used to their full potential. Our mission is to share the people, tools, apps, and other resources that will help you unleash your awesome on the world.
Yo, what's up? It's Dave. Welcome to another episode of Unleash the Awesome. Today, let's talk about how Jerry Seinfeld, Eddie Murphy, and doing Facebook live sessions consistently can help your business. And you're probably like, Dave, what in the world? Those things don't seem to make any sense or fit together, but hear me out. I was watching an episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. It's a series on YouTube that Jerry Seinfeld hosts, and the premise is he goes and gets these really awesome exotic cars. He's a car guy, and he picks up some of his friends or other celebrities, and they drive around in this car, and eventually they go somewhere and get coffee. And the whole idea is like an interview show. It's kind of like one of my other favorite shows on YouTube, which is Hot Ones, where people have a conversation while they're eating hot chicken wings. So it's just a different spin on an interview format. But I was watching this episode where Seinfeld went and picked up Eddie Murphy, and they were driving around and they were talking, and they finally got to the coffee place. And Jerry Seinfeld asked Eddie Murphy, do you think he'll come back anytime soon? And this aired before Eddie Murphy was on Saturday Night Live last season. So Eddie Murphy was like, yeah, but I'd have to go do the clubs first. And Jerry Seinfeld was like, yeah, I totally get it. And what they were talking about is one of the ways comedians refine their craft is they go to small clubs and they try out some of their jokes. And some of them hit, some of them miss, and they keep the ones that hit and they get rid of the ones that miss, or maybe they'll try them again at one other club, and if they still miss, then they get rid of them. But generally what they do is they go from club to club to club, trying out their new material, and they see the reaction from the audience. They get feedback, they get laughter, or they get nothing. And so they get to keep trying and trying and trying. And so Eddie Murphy was saying, before I would come back and do like a Netflix special or HBO, comedy special or something, I would have to do the club scene for a couple months. And I've heard lots of comedians talk about this. Seinfeld said the same thing. He still occasionally will do some dates. So he's not, been totally out of the scene like Eddie Murphy has. So he's still got some material and he could work with. And so he probably wouldn't need as much ramp up time. But I've heard lots of other comedians and other creative professionals talk about these things, about honing your craft in smaller venues. Matter of fact, when I used to be in Greenville, North Carolina, when I used to live there, it was not unusual to see a couple bands show up at this local club. It was called The Attic. I don't think it's there anymore. And I would go there occasionally on the weekends. And sometimes they'd be like, oh, okay, tonight we have a special guest. It's Dave Matthews. And this was before Dave Matthews was super popular. And it would be him and his band. And they would just play some songs and try it out, get used to it, and see what kind of response they got to their songs. And then one other time I was there, it was like, oh, here's this band, Hootie and the Blowfish. See, both those bands are Carolina-based. I think they're both South Carolina probably. But they would tour around the Carolinas and do these small clubs and try out their stuff. And then all of a sudden they got these big record contracts and things like that. Big labels sign them. So what the heck does that have to do with you? Well, I see a lot of people who are trying to write a book or create a course or create a membership or something like that, create some kind of business online, and they spend so much time trying to get it right or trying to write this thing or trying to perfect this thing or whatever, and they don't give it any exposure to people until they launch it. So they're like, okay, I'm going to get all this stuff right. I'm going to get this course right, whatever. I'm going to put it out there. And then they build it or write it or create it and they put it out there. And it's not unusual for them to get crickets, nothing, silence, no sales, because they hadn't vetted their material beforehand. And one of the things you have to remember when you're creating a business like this is you are not your customer. So a lot of times you'll sit there and you'll say, well, I would like this and I think this makes sense and my customer might like that. You don't really know until you try it with them. So unfortunately, I see so many people building these things, creating these things without checking in with an audience or their prospects or getting any feedback or exposure, without perhaps doing a small beta launch or something like that to get some feedback. They just put it out there and then they wasted all of this time, 6 months, a year, building this platform, doing all this jazz, and they put it out there and then nothing. And then they're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This sucks, blah, blah, blah. Dave, what did I do wrong? And I'll ask some clarifying questions. And one of the things 100% of the time when this happens is that they had not given it any exposure to people first. So what that has to do with you and Facebook Lives is this, or Instagram Live. I don't, any of these platforms, you could do it on these days. I think even Twitter, you can go live now. I think TikTok maybe too. Work on your material. Try it. Do Facebook Lives. If you would do a Facebook Live every single day, or an Instagram Live, whatever, let's just use all those terms interchangeably. But if you would do a Facebook Live every day, either on your profile or your business page or in a group that you have, you can try out new material and you can see what people like. And you will get better at your wording and your packaging of the content. Maybe you'll get clearer. Maybe you get more concise. Maybe you'll have more stories to tell about it, more metaphors, similes, whatever. And you'll see how that lands on your audience. And they'll give you feedback. And people will say, man, I really like that, or that's great. Or they'll give it some hearts or whatever. And that way you can take that material and say, oh, that one was a hit. I need to save that one. I've actually done some of that stuff with this very podcast. I've done Facebook Lives on a lot of the things that I've covered in previous episodes of this podcast. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's so great. I love that. And I thought, well, if they like it in that format, how cool would it be if I could just create it in an audio format and share it with you, my podcast listeners? Maybe you guys will like it too. And anytime that I've done that, it's had 100% hit rate because I've already tested the material with people and I know they like it. I know they want it. I know they want to learn more about it. I know they want to do a deeper dive, whatever. And so I come over here and do an episode. Sometimes I just rip the audio directly from a Facebook Live and dump it right in here into the podcast, if it makes sense. So my encouragement to you would be try your stuff out, work it out, and not just like with your friend or your family or your next door neighbor. Like, no, you have to put it out there and you have to try it and refine it and try it. I'll give you one more example. My friend Russell Brunson just released his book, Traffic Secrets. And you heard me talk about that in a couple episodes. He was actually a guest here on a few episodes and he let me share some of the content from his book. But his book just came out and he's been writing it for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And as he was sharing what it was all about, I was like, oh my gosh, I have heard or seen him talk about 80% of this. Because I've seen him on stage, I've been to his events, I listened to his podcast. And so the material in the book, there was really not a ton new in there, to me anyway. And it just reinforced the idea because he shares the same concept that you got to try your stuff out. You got to work it out. You got to put it out there. So he had actually shared a lot of that information before in front of smaller live audiences, got their feedback, then he tweaked it, then he did it in Facebook Lives, then he did it on his podcast, then he did it a couple times. And then once he had it down, he's like, cool, let's commit this to a book and let's get it out there. So even he's out there refining his message. So pretty much anybody that I've seen that's really successful with this stuff, they are refining their message in smaller pieces, in smaller broadcasts, on a consistent level for weeks, months, years before they put that final package thing out there. So my encouragement to you would be, get out there and publish content consistently. Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives, Twitter, TikTok, whatever, podcast episodes, blog posts, put it out there because as you start to find your voice around these things and these subjects, your audience will start to find you. But if you wait and try to perfect it and try to get it all right, then you're not building an audience in the process and you're certainly not refining your material in the process. And that is a formula for disaster, which is what I want you to avoid. So that's it for this episode of Unleash the Awesome. Until next time, go out and unleash your awesome on the world. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Unleash the Awesome. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share us on your favorite social media platforms using #UnleashAwesome.